What if I told you that the greatest king in Israel's history was once so insignificant that his own father forgot to call him when a prophet came searching for the chosen one? While his brothers stood tall and impressive before Samuel, a shepherd boy remained in the fields, unknown, unnoticed, unchosen by men. But God whispered, "I have found him." This is the story of David, a man whose life reads like an impossible prophecy. A boy who killed a giant with a single stone, a fugitive who refused to murder the king hunting him, a warrior whose words became prayers sung for 3,000 years, a sinner whose repentance moved the heart of God. And from his bloodline would come the promise that would shake eternity itself, a kingdom with no end. But here's the mystery that haunts every page of his story. How could God call an adulterer and murderer a man after my own heart? What did David possess that made him the standard by which every future king would be measured? The answer will challenge everything you think you know about righteousness, redemption, and destiny. This is not just history. This is prophecy unfolding before your eyes. In the small town of Bethlehem, there lived a man named Jesse who had 8 sons. The youngest was David, and while his older brothers were doing important things, David was out in the fields taking care of his father's sheep. It wasn't a glamorous job. It was lonely work that nobody really noticed or cared about. Day after day, David would lead the sheep to green pastures and still waters, watching over them from sunrise to sunset. But something special happened during those quiet hours alone. David wasn't just passing time, he was talking to God. He would sing songs and play his harp, composing melodies that poured straight from his heart to heaven. The hills became his sanctuary, and God became his closest friend. While the world saw just a shepherd boy doing a simple job, God saw something completely different. He saw a heart that was fully devoted to him. David's brothers were the ones people paid attention to. They were older, stronger, and more impressive. When you looked at Jesse's family, David was easy to overlook. He was the youngest, the smallest, the one left behind when important matters needed attention. His job was to stay with the sheep, while others did what seemed like more significant work. Nobody in Bethlehem could have imagined that this forgotten youngest son would one day become the most important person in the entire nation. One day, God spoke to the prophet Samuel with urgent instructions. The Lord told Samuel, as recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." Samuel was afraid because King Saul was still alive. And if the king found out that Samuel was anointing a replacement, it could mean death. But God gave him a plan. Samuel would go to Bethlehem to offer a sacrifice and invite Jesse's family to join him. So Samuel did exactly what the Lord commanded. When he arrived in Bethlehem, he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When Samuel saw Jesse's oldest son, Eliab, he was immediately impressed. Eliab was tall and handsome, looking every bit like a king should look. Samuel thought to himself that this must surely be the Lord's anointed. But God spoke to Samuel, and in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, the Lord said, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one, Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. Each time, Samuel heard the same answer from God, "This is not the one." Finally, Samuel asked Jesse the question that would change everything. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 11, Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" And Jesse answered, "There is still the youngest, but he is tending the sheep." Samuel told Jesse to send for him immediately, saying they would not sit down until the boy arrived. So they sent for David and brought him in from the fields. When David arrived, the Bible describes him in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 12. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. And then God spoke to Samuel, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." Samuel took his horn of oil and anointed David right there in the presence of his brothers. At that moment, according to 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 13, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Everything changed in that instant, though nobody else understood what had just happened. David went back to tending sheep, but he was no longer just a shepherd boy. He was the future king of Israel, chosen by God himself. Taking care of sheep might sound peaceful and safe, but it was actually dangerous work. The wilderness where David kept his father's flocks was home to predators that were always looking for an easy meal. Lions roamed those hills, and bears would come down from the mountains searching for food. When they spotted a flock of sheep, they saw dinner. But David wasn't the kind of shepherd who ran away when danger came. When a lion or a bear would grab a lamb from the flock, David didn't freeze in fear or let the animal go. He would chase after the predator, attack it, and rescue the lamb right out of its mouth. If the animal turned on him and tried to fight back, David would grab it by its hair and strike it down until it was dead. These weren't small animals. A lion could easily kill a grown man, and a bear was just as deadly. But David had something more powerful than any weapon. He had faith that God would protect him. Every time he faced one of these wild beasts, he was learning to trust not in his own strength, but in the Lord who gave him courage and victory. Nobody was watching when David fought these battles. His brothers didn't see his bravery. His father didn't witness his victories. These were private moments between a young shepherd and his God, where David proved over and over again that he would risk his own life to protect what had been entrusted to him. He was faithful in the small things, not knowing that God was preparing him for something much bigger. Every lion he killed, every bear he defeated, was training for a battle that would make him famous throughout the entire world. King Saul had once been a man chosen by God, anointed as Israel's first king, but Saul had disobeyed the Lord, and because of his rebellion, God's Spirit departed from him. What happened next was terrifying. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 14 tells us, "Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him." This tormenting spirit would come upon Saul suddenly, throwing him into dark moods filled with fear, anger, and depression. The king, who was supposed to lead Israel with strength and wisdom, was now a man battling invisible demons that he couldn't control. His servants watched him suffer and knew they had to find some way to help their king. One of the servants had an idea. In 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 16, he suggested to Saul, "Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better." Saul agreed to this plan and told his servants to find him a skilled musician. Another servant spoke up with a recommendation. In 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 18, he said, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him." So Saul sent messengers to Jesse with a simple request, "Send me your son David, the one who is with the sheep." Jesse prepared gifts for the king, a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent David to Saul. When David arrived, something remarkable happened. Saul liked him very much, and David entered the king's service as his armor-bearer. Saul even sent a message back to Jesse, asking that David be allowed to remain in his service, and whenever the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, David would take his harp and play. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 23 describes what happened. Then relief would come to Saul. He would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. The young shepherd's music had power, not because of David himself, but because the Spirit of the Lord was with him. In the darkest moments of Saul's torment, it was David's presence that brought peace. War broke out between Israel and the Philistines, and the two armies positioned themselves on opposite hills, with a valley running between them. The Philistines gathered at Soko in Judah and camped at Ephes Dammim, while Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah, drawing up their battle lines to meet the Philistine army. 3 of David's older brothers had followed Saul to war. Eliab was the oldest, Abinadab was the second, and Shammah was the third. These 3 had joined the army. But David, as we read in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 15, went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. He wasn't staying at the battle full time. He would serve King Saul when needed, but he would also return home to take care of the family's flock. One day, Jesse called David and gave him a mission. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 17 and 18, Jesse told him, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them." It was a simple errand. Bring food to his brothers and find out how they were doing. Early the next morning, David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out just as Jesse had instructed. He reached the camp right as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. The timing was significant. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other across the valley, and the tension in the air was thick. David arrived at exactly the moment when everything was about to unfold. David left his supplies with the keeper of supplies and ran to the battle lines to greet his brothers. He was excited to see them, eager to hear news from the front. But while he was talking with them, something happened that made everyone's blood run cold. A champion warrior stepped out from the Philistine ranks, and the entire atmosphere changed. His name was Goliath, and his appearance on the battlefield meant that another day of terror had begun for the army of Israel. Goliath of Gath was not a normal man. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 4 tells us, "A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span." That meant he was over 9 feet tall, a giant who towered above every soldier in both armies. When he walked onto the battlefield, he was an absolutely terrifying sight. The description of his armor shows just how massive and intimidating he was. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 5 through 7 paint the picture. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield-bearer went ahead of him. Everything about Goliath was designed to create fear. His armor alone weighed about 125 pounds. His spear's iron point weighed around 15 pounds. He even had someone walking in front of him just to carry his shield. This wasn't just a big soldier. This was a one-man army, a walking fortress of bronze and iron who looked completely unstoppable. But the most terrifying thing about Goliath wasn't his size or his armor. It was what came out of his mouth. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, and his words were meant to humiliate and destroy their courage. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 8 through 10, he yelled, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." This was Goliath's challenge, single combat to decide the entire war. Winner takes all. The losing nation would become servants to the victors. It was a challenge that made logical sense from the Philistine perspective. Why should thousands die in battle when one fight could settle everything? but it was also a challenge that seemed impossible for Israel to accept because they didn't have anyone who could possibly stand against this giant. And then comes the devastating reality recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 11. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. King Saul himself, who stood head and shoulders above most men, was terrified. Every soldier in the army, trained warriors who had fought in previous battles, were paralyzed with fear. Not one man had the courage to step forward. For 40 days, Goliath came forward morning and evening and took his stand, repeating his challenge twice a day. Every single time, the result was the same: total silence from Israel's army. Nobody moved, nobody volunteered, nobody dared to face the giant. Day after day, the champion of the Philistines mocked the armies of the living God, and day after day, Israel had no answer for him. Until David arrived. David heard Goliath's words, and something inside him ignited. While trained soldiers trembled and looked away, the shepherd boy from Bethlehem felt something completely different: righteous anger. He started asking the men standing near him questions. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 26, David asked, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The soldiers told David about the reward King Saul had promised. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 25, they explained, "The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." It was an incredible offer: riches, the king's daughter as a wife, and freedom from taxes for the entire family. Yet even with such rewards promised, nobody was willing to face Goliath. David kept asking different people the same questions, and his words eventually reached King Saul. Someone reported to the king that there was a young man asking bold questions about the Philistine giant. So Saul sent for David, curious about this person who seemed unafraid when everyone else was paralyzed by fear. When David stood before the king, he spoke with confidence that shocked everyone listening. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 32, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Here was a shepherd boy, probably still a teenager, volunteering to do what the king and all his mighty warriors were too afraid to attempt. Saul looked at David and saw a young man who didn't understand what he was offering to do. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 33, Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." It was a reasonable observation. Goliath was a professional soldier who had been training for war since he was young. David was a shepherd. The mismatch seemed obvious to everyone, but David had an answer that nobody expected. He began to tell Saul about his experiences in the wilderness, and suddenly his time as a shepherd took on new meaning. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 and 35, David explained, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it." David wasn't finished. He looked at King Saul and made a statement that revealed the source of his courage. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 36 records his words, "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." Do you see what David saw that nobody else could see? While everyone else looked at Goliath and saw an unbeatable giant, David looked at Goliath and saw another predator that needed to be destroyed for threatening what belonged to God. Then David spoke the words that would prove to be absolutely true. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 37, he declared, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." David's confidence wasn't in himself. It wasn't in his own strength or skill. His confidence was in the God who had protected him before and would protect him again. Saul looked at this young man and made his decision. In the second part of verse 37, we read Saul's response, "Go, and the Lord be with you." The king gave his permission. Israel finally had a champion who would face the giant. Not a trained warrior, not an experienced soldier, but a shepherd boy who trusted God more than everyone else trusted their fears. Saul wanted to help David in the only way he knew how. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 38, we read, "Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head." The king was trying to give David every advantage, clothing him in royal armor that had protected Saul in previous battles. But there was a problem. David put on the armor and tried to walk around in it, and he quickly realized it wasn't going to work. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 39, David said to Saul, "I cannot go in these because I am not used to them." So David took off all the armor. He wasn't being disrespectful to the king's generosity. He was being smart. He understood a simple truth. You can't fight effectively with weapons and protection you haven't tested. Instead, David chose the tools he knew. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 40 tells us what he did. "Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine." A staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones. That was David's arsenal. To any observer, it looked like he was walking to his death armed with toys. When Goliath saw David coming toward him, he couldn't believe his eyes. The Philistine looked at David with complete contempt. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 42 says, "He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him." This wasn't the opponent Goliath expected. Where was Israel's mighty warrior? Where was their champion? Instead, they sent a boy with a stick. Goliath's anger exploded into insults. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 43, he shouted at David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Then Goliath cursed David by his gods. The giant continued his threats in verse 44, "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." Goliath wanted to humiliate not just David, but all of Israel. He wanted to make a public spectacle of this boy's death. But David didn't flinch. He didn't slow down. He didn't show even a hint of fear. Instead, David shouted back, and his words rang across the valley for both armies to hear. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 45 through 47 record David's response. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Those words weren't just brave talk. They were a declaration of faith. David was announcing to everyone watching that the outcome of this fight had already been decided by God. The giant had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. As the Philistine moved closer to attack, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 49 describes what happened next. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. One shot, one stone. The giant who had terrorized Israel for 40 days crashed to the earth. David ran and stood over the fallen Philistine. Since David didn't have a sword of his own, he drew Goliath's sword from its sheath. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 51 tells us he took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they panicked and ran. The Israelites surged forward with shouts of victory, pursuing their enemies and plundering their camp. The battle was over. A shepherd boy with a sling had defeated the champion that an entire army feared. David had removed the disgrace from Israel, and everyone now knew his name. After David killed Goliath, everything changed. When the army returned home from battle, something happened that would turn David's greatest triumph into the beginning of his greatest danger. Women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and tambourines and lyres. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 7 tells us what they sang. Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. It was meant as celebration, but those words were poison to Saul's ears. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 8 records Saul's reaction. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? From that moment on, something dark took root in Saul's heart. Verse 9 tells us plainly, and from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The very next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully upon Saul. David was in the palace playing his harp as he usually did, but this time was different. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 11 says, Saul had a spear in his hand and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Saul threw the spear at David 2 separate times, and each time David managed to escape. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 12 tells us why Saul wanted him dead. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David but had departed from Saul. Saul's fear led to a calculated decision. He removed David from his personal service and sent him out as a commander over 1,000 men, hoping that battle would accomplish what his spear could not. But the plan failed completely. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 14 says, In everything he did, he had great success, because the Lord was with him. Meanwhile, 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 16 explains, But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. David fought alongside his men, leading from the front. His courage and success made him a hero to the people, but every victory only deepened Saul's jealousy and murderous intentions. David's military campaigns continued to bring him success and fame, but Saul's hatred grew darker and more determined. Then came another moment when the evil spirit tormented Saul. David was playing his harp to bring relief to the troubled king. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 9 and 10 describe what happened. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. This attack was different. Saul was sitting with his spear already in his hand, waiting. When David dodged and the spear stuck deep in the wall, David knew that staying in the palace meant certain death. He had to run for his life, but Saul wasn't finished. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 11 tells us Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. The king posted guards around David's home, planning to murder him at first light. Fortunately, David's wife Michal loved him and warned him. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 11 records her urgent words. If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed. Michal helped David escape through a window, lowering him down so he could slip past the guards in the darkness and flee. Then Michal did something clever to buy David more time. She took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head to make it look like someone was sleeping there. When Saul's men came in the morning to seize David, Michal told them he was sick. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 14 says, "But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed, and at the head was some goat's hair." When the deception was discovered, Saul confronted his daughter. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 17 records his angry question, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" Michal protected herself by lying to her father, but the truth was clear. She had chosen her husband over her father. David was now officially a fugitive. Before David became a fugitive, Saul had tried a different strategy to destroy him, one that looked like honor, but was actually a deadly trap. It started with Saul's older daughter, Merab. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 17 records Saul's offer. "Here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." But the verse reveals Saul's hidden plan. For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that." David's response showed his humble heart. In 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 18 he replied, "Who am I, and what is my family or my clan in Israel, that I should become the son-in-law of the king?" But when the time came for Merab to be given to David, Saul broke his promise. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 19 tells us, "So, when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Meholah." However, something unexpected happened that gave Saul a new opportunity. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 20 says, "Now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased." Saul immediately saw how he could use this to his advantage. He told his attendants to speak to David privately and encourage him to marry Michal. When they approached David, he gave them the same humble answer. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 23 records his response. "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I'm only a poor man and little known." When Saul heard this, he set his trap. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 25 tells us what Saul said. "The king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." But the verse reveals the truth. Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. It was essentially a suicide mission, but the plan backfired spectacularly. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 27 tells us, "David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage." David didn't just meet the requirement, he doubled it. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 28 and 29 reveal the result. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David, and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. In the middle of all this hatred, there was one person in Saul's family who saw David completely differently. Jonathan was Saul's son, the crown prince who should have inherited the throne, but Jonathan's heart was nothing like his father's. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 1 tells us, "After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself." Jonathan did something that showed the depth of his love. 1 Samuel chapter 18 verses 3 and 4 record, "And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. These weren't just gifts. They were symbols of Jonathan's very identity as prince and warrior. When Saul's murderous intentions became clear, Jonathan found himself caught between his father and his friend. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 1 tells us, Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan's loyalty to David was stronger. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 2 says, But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. Jonathan went to Saul and spoke well of David. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verses 4 and 5 record Jonathan's defense. Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Jonathan's words worked temporarily. 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 6 says, Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath, As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. But this peace didn't last. After David escaped through the window, he ran to Jonathan. They met in secret, and David poured out his heart. 1 Samuel chapter 20 verse 1 records David's question, What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to kill me? David devised a plan to test Saul's true intentions involving the new moon feast. Before they tested Saul, something profound happened. 1 Samuel chapter 20 verse 16 and 17 tell us, So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord call David's enemies to account. And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. The plan unfolded as David predicted. When Saul discovered David was missing from the feast, he exploded with rage at Jonathan. 1 Samuel chapter 20 verse 30 records Saul's furious words, You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? When Jonathan defended David, 1 Samuel chapter 20 verse 33 says, Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Saul tried to kill his own son. The next morning, Jonathan met David one final time. 1 Samuel chapter 20 verse 41 describes their farewell. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan spoke final words recorded in verse 42, Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. David fled and eventually found refuge in a cave at Adullam. But Samuel chapter 22 verse 2 describes who gathered around him. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. These weren't trained soldiers. They were outcasts, people in trouble, people with nowhere else to go. David and his men moved from place to place, staying ahead of Saul. When Saul heard where David was, 1 Samuel chapter 23 verse 8 says, Saul called up all his forces for battle to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. The king mobilized his entire army to hunt down one man. David escaped, and his men grew to 600. 1 Samuel chapter 23 verse 13 tells us, When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he did not go there. 1 Samuel chapter 23 verse 14 describes David's life. David stayed in the wilderness strongholds and in the hills of the desert of Ziph. Day after day Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. Every single day Saul was hunting David, but every day God protected him. While David was at Horesh, something encouraging happened. 1 Samuel chapter 23 verse 16 tells us, And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. This was their last meeting. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 17 records Jonathan's words. Don't be afraid. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. But then came betrayal. The Ziphites went to Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 19 records their words. Is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh, on the hill of Hakilah, south of Jeshimon? These were people from David's own tribe, selling him out. Saul was pleased. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 21 records his response. The Lord bless you for your concern for me. He gave them instructions to gather detailed information. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 23 says, Find out about all the hiding places he uses and come back to me with definite information. Then I will go with you. If he is in the area, I will track him down among all the clans of Judah. The pursuit grew dangerously close. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 26 describes the terrifying moment. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, it looked like the end. But at that exact moment, 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 27 says, A messenger came to Saul, saying, Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land. Saul had to break off his pursuit. God had provided escape at the last possible second. After Saul returned from fighting the Philistines, men told him David was in the desert of En-Gedi. Saul took 3,000 able young men and set out to search near the crags of the wild goats. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 3 tells us, He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. For months, Saul had been hunting David, and now, by pure chance, Saul walked alone into the exact cave where David was hiding. David's men whispered to him. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 4 records what they said. This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. But David crept up and only cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Even this bothered his conscience. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 5 says, Afterward David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. David turned to his men and made his position clear. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 6 and 7 record his words, The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. Saul left the cave, and then David came out and called after him. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 8 says, Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, My lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. David explained what had just happened. In verses 10 and 11 he said, This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. When David finished speaking, Saul was overcome. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 16 says, When David finished saying this, Saul asked, Is that your voice, David, my son? And he wept aloud. In verses 17 and 18, Saul admitted, You are more righteous than I. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. Then Saul made a stunning admission in verse 20. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 22 tells us, So David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. David didn't trust Saul's repentance enough to go back with him. Time passed, and there was a wealthy man in Maon with property in Carmel. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 2 tells us, He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and 1 Samuel chapter 25 verse 3 describes him and his wife. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. David's men had protected Nabal's shepherds in the wilderness. When David heard Nabal was shearing his sheep, a time of celebration and generosity, he sent 10 young men with a polite request. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verses 7 and 8 record part of David's message. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Therefore be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. But Nabal's response was insulting. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verses 10 and 11 record his words. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? David's reaction was swift. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verse 13 says, David said to his men, each of you strap on your sword. So they did, and David strapped his on as well. About 400 men went up with David. David swore an oath recorded in verse 22. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. But one of Nabal's servants ran to Abigail. The servant told her in 1 Samuel chapter 25 verses 14 through 16. David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us. Abigail acted quickly. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verses 18 and 19 tell us, Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, Go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. When Abigail saw David, she threw herself down before him and spoke. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verses 24 through 26 record her words. Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. Since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. Abigail continued prophetically in verses 28 through 30, reminding David of his destiny and warning him that if he committed this massacre, it would stain his conscience forever. Her words hit their mark. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verses 32 and 33 record David's response, Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment, and for keeping me from bloodshed this day, and from avenging myself with my own hands. Abigail returned home and found Nabal drunk and feasting. The next morning, when sober, she told him everything. 1 Samuel chapter 25 verse 37 records, Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, God struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard, he praised God and sent messengers to propose marriage to Abigail. She accepted, and the wise woman who had saved David from sin became his wife. The Ziphites betrayed David again. They went to Saul and told him David's location. Saul took 3,000 select troops to the desert of Ziph to search for David. David learned Saul had come, and he went to spy on Saul's camp. He saw where Saul and Abner, the commander of the army, were sleeping. David asked for a volunteer. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verse 6 records, "Who will go down into the camp with me to Saul?" Abishai answered, "I'll go with you." That night, they snuck into the camp. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verse 7 says, "So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head." This was David's second opportunity to kill Saul. Abishai saw it as divine intervention. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verse 8 records his words, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." But David refused. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verses 9 through 11 record his response, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come, and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go." So they took Saul's spear and water jug. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verse 12 tells us, "No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep." It was supernatural. God himself had made this possible. David crossed to the other side and called out. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verse 15 records his mocking question to Abner, "Aren't you a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king?" David held up the spear and water jug as proof. Saul recognized David's voice. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verse 21 records Saul's response. Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son. Because you considered my life precious today, I will not try to harm you again. Surely I have acted like a fool and have been terribly wrong." But David kept his distance. 1 Samuel chapter 26 verses 22 and 23 record his answer. "Here is the king's spear. Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards everyone for their righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed." Saul spoke his final words to David in 1 Samuel chapter 26, verse 25. "May you be blessed, David, my son. You will do great things and surely triumph." So David went on his way, and Saul returned home. This was the end. They would never speak again. David had spared Saul twice, but he knew he could never be safe as long as Saul lived. The Philistines gathered their forces for a massive invasion of Israel. They assembled at Aphek, while the Israelites camped by the spring in Jezreel. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was terrified. 1 Samuel chapter 28 verse 6 tells us what happened when Saul tried to get guidance. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. God had completely abandoned Saul. In his desperation, Saul did something he himself had forbidden. He disguised himself and went to consult a medium at Endor. 1 Samuel chapter 28 verse 11 records what Saul asked her, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman summoned Samuel's spirit, she screamed because she realized this was King Saul. The spirit of Samuel appeared, and he was not happy to be disturbed. Samuel spoke words that sealed Saul's fate. 1 Samuel chapter 28 verses 18 and 19 record the prophet's message. "Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." The prophecy was devastating. Tomorrow, Saul and his sons would die. The next day, the battle went exactly as Samuel predicted. 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 1 tells us, "Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Israelite army was being slaughtered. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons. 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 2 says, "The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua." Jonathan, David's beloved friend, fell in battle. The fighting grew fierce around Saul himself. 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 3 tells us, "The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul knew he was finished." 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 4 records his final moments. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it, so Saul took his own sword and fell on it. 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 6 summarizes the tragedy. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. The dynasty that began with such promise ended in disaster on Mount Gilboa. David was not at the battle. He had been living in the town of Ziklag. On the 3rd day after the battle, a man arrived from Saul's camp. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 2 describes him. His clothes were torn, and dust was on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him respect. David asked him where he came from, and the man explained he had escaped from the Israelite camp. David asked the crucial question recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 4. "What happened? Tell me." The man answered, "The men fled from the battle. Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." David needed proof. The man told a story that would cost him his life. He claimed he had killed Saul at the king's own request and brought the crown and armband as proof. The Amalekite expected a reward. But 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 11 tells us David's reaction. "Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening. Then David turned to the young man." 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 14 says, David asked him, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" David called one of his men and said, "Go, strike him down." The man struck down the Amalekite and he died. David's grief was genuine and deep. He composed one of the most beautiful laments in all of Scripture. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 19 begins, "A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen." David continued in verses 21 and 22. "Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain. May no showers fall on your terraced fields. For there the shield of the mighty was despised, the shield of Saul, no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied." Then David spoke words that revealed the depth of his love. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 23 says, "Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions." David's words about Jonathan became even more personal. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 26 records his cry, "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women." The lament ended in verse 27, "How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished." After the deaths of Saul and Jonathan, David sought God's guidance. 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 1 tells us, "In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, 'Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?' he asked. The Lord said, 'Go up.' David asked, 'Where shall I go?' 'To Hebron,' the Lord answered. David moved to Hebron with his wives and men. 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 4 tells us, Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah. But David was only king over Judah, not all Israel. Meanwhile, Abner son of Ner, Saul's army commander, had taken Saul's son Ishbosheth and made him king over the northern tribes. 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 10 tells us, Ishbosheth son of Saul was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. The tribe of Judah, however, remained loyal to David. Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms. 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 11 says, "The length of time David was king in Hebron over Judah was 7 years and 6 months." 2 Samuel chapter 3 verse 1 describes the situation. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. The turning point came when Abner had a falling out with Ishbosheth and decided to switch sides. 2 Samuel chapter 3 verse 12 records Abner's message to David, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." David agreed. Abner went to the elders of Israel and convinced them. 2 Samuel chapter 3 verse 17 and 18 record what he said. "For some time you have wanted to make David your king. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, 'By my servant David I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies.' But Joab, David's commander, hated Abner and murdered him in revenge for his brother's death. When David heard what Joab had done, he was furious and publicly mourned Abner. Then 2 of Ishbosheth's own commanders murdered him and brought his head to David, expecting a reward. But 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 11 and 12 record David's response. "How much more, when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house and on his own bed, should I not now demand his blood from your hand and rid the earth of you?" So David gave an order to his men, and they killed them. The path was now clear for David to become king over all Israel. With Ishbosheth dead, all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron. 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 3 tells us, when all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he would reign for 40 years. David needed a capital city that could unite north and south. He chose Jerusalem, still held by the Jebusites. The Jebusites were so confident that 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 6 records their taunt, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." But David captured the fortress anyway. 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 7 tells us, "Nevertheless David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David." David grew more powerful. 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 10 explains why. "And he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him." Then David did something crucial. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. They placed the ark on a new cart, but when the oxen stumbled, a man named Uzzah reached out to steady it. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 7 says, "The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God." 3 months later, David tried again, this time following God's instructions carefully. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 14 describes what happened. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might. David had established his throne in Jerusalem and brought God's presence into the city. Jerusalem was now truly the city of David, the political and spiritual center of Israel. After David was settled in his palace, something began to bother him. 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 2 records David's concern, "Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." David shared this with Nathan the prophet, who initially encouraged him. But that night, God spoke to Nathan with a different message. 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 5 records the beginning of God's message. Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? God reminded Nathan that he had never asked for a house of cedar. But then God's message took an unexpected turn. Instead of letting David build a house for God, God was going to build a house for David, a dynasty. 2 Samuel chapter 7 verses 11 and 12 record God's promise. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. God continued in verse 13, He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. The reason David couldn't build the temple is explained in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 verse 8, where David later told Solomon, You are not to build a house for my name, because you are a warrior and have shed blood. David had been a man of war, but the temple would be built by a man of peace. 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 16 records the eternal nature of this covenant. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. This was a prophecy ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ, the eternal King from David's line. When Nathan told David everything, David sat before the Lord and prayed. 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 18 records his words, Who am I, sovereign Lord, and what is my family, that you have brought me this far? David had wanted to build God a house, but instead God promised to build David a house, an eternal dynasty. In the spring, when kings go off to war, David's army went out to fight the Ammonites. But 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 1 tells us, But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David walked on his palace roof and saw a woman bathing. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 2 says, The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to find out about her. The answer came back in verse 3. She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. She was married. But 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 4 tells us, Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Sometime later, Bathsheba sent word to David. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 5 records her message. I am pregnant. Those 3 words meant David's sin could not stay hidden. David tried to cover up what he had done. He brought Uriah home from battle, hoping Uriah would sleep with his wife. But Uriah was too honorable. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 11 records his explanation. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Uriah refused to enjoy home while his brothers slept in tents. When the cover-up failed, David did something worse. He wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 15 records what David wrote, Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. Joab followed orders. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 17 tells us, When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. After Bathsheba mourned, David married her. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 27 says, And she became his wife and bore him a son. David probably thought he had gotten away with it, but the verse ends with 7 words that changed everything. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. The Lord sent Nathan the prophet to David. Nathan told him a story about 2 men, one rich with many flocks, one poor with only one little lamb. The rich man took the poor man's lamb to feed a traveler. David burned with anger. 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 5 records his response. As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die." Then Nathan pointed his finger at David. 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 7 says, "Then Nathan said to David, 'You are the man.'" Nathan continued with God's words, reminding David of all God had given him. Then came the accusation in verse 9. "Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites." The consequences were severe. 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 10 tells us, "Now therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." God continued in verse 11, "Out of your own household I am going to bring calamity on you." Then came the most heartbreaking consequence. 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 14 says, "But because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die." David's response was immediate. 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 13 records his words, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan responded, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die." But the child would still die. Shortly after the child became ill, David pleaded with God, fasting and lying on the ground. 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 18 tells us, "On the seventh day the child died." When David realized the child was dead, he got up, washed, worshipped, and ate. He explained in 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 22 and 23, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, 'Who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me.' Then David comforted Bathsheba. 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 24 tells us, "She gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him." David had a son named Absalom who was exceptionally handsome. 2 Samuel chapter 14 verse 25 describes him, "In all Israel there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot there was no blemish in him." But Absalom was also cunning and ambitious. He began to undermine his father's authority. 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 2 tells us, "He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. And when people came with complaints for the king, Absalom would intercept them." 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 3 and 4 record his words, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Now 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 5 tells us, "Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him." 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 6 says, "Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel." After 4 years, Absalom was ready. He went to Hebron and declared himself king. 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 10 records, "Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, 'As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron.' When David heard about the rebellion, he knew he had to flee. 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 14 records his command, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom." The scene of David leaving was heartbreaking. 2 Samuel chapter 15 verse 30 describes it. "But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too, and were weeping as they went up. Absalom entered Jerusalem and took control. Then he fulfilled God's judgment on David." 2 Samuel chapter 16 verse 22 tells us, So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Eventually, the conflict came to battle. Before the fighting, David gave specific orders. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 5 records his command, "Be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake." During the battle, Absalom was riding his mule when his head got caught in tree branches. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 9 says, "The mule kept going, so Absalom was left hanging in midair. When Joab heard where Absalom was, he took 3 javelins. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 14 and 15 tell us, Joab took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree, and 10 of Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. When David heard that Absalom was dead, he was overwhelmed with grief. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 33 describes his response. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it gave you hope that God can use imperfect people for his perfect purposes, then please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next Bible story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about God's faithfulness, mercy, and the power of genuine repentance. Leave a comment below telling us what part of David's story impacted you the most. Remember, God is still writing stories today, and yours might be the next one that inspires someone else to trust him completely. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.